Good morning. I'd like to start off by thanking the Englewood Hospital Breakfast Club, Lindsay Capiano, Erica Park, and everyone on the committee for having me here today. I'm really honored to be part of this wonderful event for my local hospital that has done everything from sew my daughter's chin up to a lot of other things. So happy to be here. My name's Cate Holahan, and I'm here because I'm an author. I've published 4 books, the next of which comes out in July, and I've written 2 more that are making their way through various stages of the editing and publishing process. Before I was an author, I was a journalist for many years, working for Bergen County's own Record newspaper, and after that, the Boston Globe and Business Week. But you know, I always just loved reading and writing fiction. Even when I was a journalist, I totally made up stories. You know, not for work, of course. I know there's been a lot of talk about the fake news media, but I swear I never worked for them. Don't know who they are, blogs. Anyways, you know, I wrote fiction after my day job, sharing facts. And the stories that always appealed to me were these you know, crime and suspense stories, tales in which bad things happen to seemingly good people. And we have to figure out why. What went wrong? What mistakes were made that spiraled out of control? You know, who's responsible? Kind of all these deep, dark questions. Some people think I must be pretty disturbed to spend my day thinking about horrible things and why they happen. My father, for example, I remember telling him the premise of my first novel. We were at my parents' house, had just enjoyed a pleasant family dinner, and at the time I'm holding my baby, and I have my toddler, you know, there. That was when she was a toddler, I know, cute. And she's there, you know, going around and taking the toys and putting them in her mouth, taste testing the toys as they do. And as I'm kind of running around with the baby, trying to remove all the choking hazards, my dad's there, and he's kind of looking at the whole scene, and he has the grandparent glow on his face. Any grandparents in the audience? Oh, yeah. Okay, well then you know this look. Any parents? You've probably seen this look on your parents' own faces. It's this satisfied, schadenfreude-filled smile that says, oh, my kids have kids, and they're finally gonna understand everything I went through. And it's absolutely not my problem. So as I'm there, kind of taking toys out of her mouth, I say, Dad, you know, I really think this story is gonna be the one. You know, it's about a sociopathic child that has it in for her little sibling, and the only person that knows the truth is the au pair. And my father kind of looks up at me and goes, do you really think anyone's gonna read that? So the answer, as it turned out, was no. Nobody was going to read that story. However, a subsequent version of that story was published. That became my first published novel. My agent wisely suggested that I age up the villain from middle school to high school because she had teenagers, and she said, trust me, everyone thinks they're a touch evil. And so I did. I made my antagonist this beautiful, gifted, completely amoral high school student in this highly competitive dance program. And my agent pitched it as Black Swan meets the talented Mr. Ripley. And that became my first book, Dark Turns. You know, when I talked to my dad, he understood why people were reading it, but I think he kind of still wondered why I'd chosen to write this story. Why would I want to spend a year between writing this book and promoting it, you know, thinking of such awfulness? And I have to say, you know, the question kind of confused me because I'd been a journalist, right? I mean, I kind of said, Dad, thinking about horrible things and why they happen is my life's profession. I mean, have you read the newspaper recently? There's mass shootings, school shootings, regular old domestic shootings. I mean, the world gets dark, right? It gets dark. But the wonderful thing about writing crime fiction is I control the universe in my stories. And in my books, karma reigns supreme. Karma is the queen bee. And we all know what the B stands for, don't we? Yeah. I write for that catharsis of seeing the sick get better and the selfish get their comeuppance, the violent stop before they can do anything more horrible. You know, that's why I love crime fiction. That's the beauty in it. And that's, I think, why a lot of people read it. Just last year, crime fiction overtook regular fiction, general fiction, as the most read genre in the English language. In the US, it is still topped out a little bit by romance, thanks to this book, Yeah, y'all know it, right? I wonder why that was so popular. Yeah. But, crime fiction is still up there. And I think the reason is that people want to see the mystery solved. They want to see the guilty held responsible. And most importantly, they want to see victims left in a place where they have the ability, both financially and psychologically, to move on. It satisfies a sense of justice that I think so many of us feel isn't sufficiently present sometimes in our real world, right? I remember covering the $65 billion plus Ponzi scheme run by this guy. Do you guys remember him? Yeah, kind of infamous. His name is Bernie Madoff, and I remember talking to an editor at the time, and I said, how do you pronounce this? Is it Madoff? And he says, no, it's Madoff, like he made off with the victim's money. And I could not get away with that name in fiction now. If I sat there and told my editor, he'd say, that's a little on the nose, Kate. You're not Ian Fleming. It's not a Bond movie. You can't name the gold thief Goldfinger. That's not going to work. But his name was Bernie Madoff, and unfortunately, for so many of his victims, even if he spends the rest of his life in jail, there's no real justice when you've lost your savings and you've kind of gone through that. I interviewed one woman named Phyllis Molchatsky, and she had worked as an office manager on Wall Street for 2 decades, and at the age of 55 was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's and forced to retire early. And she had about $2 million, which someone suggested that she invest with Madoff, who at the time had, a great reputation. And she did. She put the whole thing there. And, she was kind of promised that if she did that, she would grow her savings so she could take care of herself for the rest of her life. And also someday put her adopted son through college. And so I interviewed her. We were in her lawyer's offices. And she's this, tiny woman sitting in front of all of these massive bookcases with these legal tomes, just trembling. And she kept repeating, it's all my money. I adopted a son so I could give him a better life, not so that he would have to take care of me. And, I don't know how much money she was able to recover. Unfortunately, she lost her suit with the SEC, and 11 billion was clawed back, but of the 65 billion in paper losses. And her story and those of other victims kind of really stuck with me. And so I wrote this book, The Widower's Wife, which you guys all have in your bags. That's the one that was a USA Today bestseller. And it deals with a kind of unscrupulous financial character and an unwitting victim of fraud. And I tried to, don't want to give away the ending, but I tried to leave my victims in a place where, they could move on, where they had the means to do that. So, that would kind of satisfy that for me. My husband is here. He works in finance, and he will be very happy that I'm publicly saying neither he nor his firm had anything to do with the inspiration for that book. My poor husband, every time I write a male character that kind of like gets his just desserts in my books, people assume that I'm taking out marital spats, like in my fiction, and they kind of say, they ask him if he needs help, and I always say, I really don't use him like much at all. I mean, I do occasionally ask him things like, hey, honey, do you think a guy would say this? Or if you wanted a girl to like you, what's a line you might use? And don't say I folded the kids' laundry, because like that really only works with me. He's not the only one that kind of worries about the stigma of being associated with me and people thinking that they're going to become characters in a book. I wrote this book, the one that's coming out, One Little Secret, and it's about a bunch of neighbors that go to the Hamptons, and one of them dies, and they kind of all have motives. And as I wrote the book, I started to tell my neighbors about it, and I'm like, I'm really excited about the story. And they're like, yeah, it's about neighbors, huh? They're looking at all of them there. It's about neighbors. So what was your inspiration? Did anybody in this room? Anybody that I know? Yeah? And they kind of like laugh when they say it, but I can see like the concerned wrinkle between the brow and the smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. And of course I said, no. I mean, on some level, they're all me, right? It's all just my idea of what somebody who's been through certain things, how they would respond to certain challenges in their life. Of course, except for one of the moms in this story, that's totally based on Mina Barony, right over there. You guys, I will let you kind of figure out. No, I'm kidding. I kid. She's, look, she was nervous for a second. She's my friend and my stylist, which is why I can make that joke. It's also why I'm standing before you dressed like this and not in Lululemon leggings and a college sweatshirt, because that's my usual look, college Lou. And always in all black, because if you become a crime writer, you have to become allergic to colorful clothing. You have to be the people wearing monochrome in the middle of spring. As part of my profession, I now have to put on sunglasses every time I pass a Lily Pulitzer. But really, I don't base stories on people that I know. I kind of think it's lazy. It's much more interesting to do the research and interview people that have had kind of life experiences that you're trying to create a character who's had similar things happen, and then create somebody new based on interviews and articles and memoirs and everything that you read. I really believe in doing the research. So much so that for my first book, I wanted a ballet school. I thought they would bring out the worst in kind of this amoral high school student that I had, And the problem was that I had never taken dance. I mean, learning the Running Man, do you guys remember it? I'm not gonna do it, I can't really. And kind of shaking my booty at bar and bat mitzvahs was the extent of my dance experience. So, but I wanted this setting, so I said, all right, I'm going to enroll in a ballet school. And fortunately for me, there was a studio in Edgewater, New Jersey, that had these adult classes that were really for former dancers that wanted to keep up with it, former professional dancers. But I knew that not only, even though they normally wouldn't let me in, that they might, because I could kind of tell she was hurting for money a little bit. I had enrolled my daughter in the ballet classes, and there were about 3 little girls, and there was room for about 25, so I figured maybe she'd bend the rules. And she did. So I show up my first day, and I'm wearing, a black leotard over black Lulus. And the director, who is about in her 70s, and she's a former dancer, and if you went into her office, she had all these framed New York Times articles and reviews of her past shows. And she sees me, and her shoulders go back, and she has a spine straight as a steel rod. She walks over. I know why you're here. And it kind of confused me a little bit, because yes, it was all black, but it without the college sweatshirt, it's a totally different uniform. So I said to her, oh, you do? All I thought she knew about me was that I had a 6-month-old and a toddler at the time. And she says, yes, you are a marshmallow, but don't worry, I can make you a rock. And so, normally I would have been a little annoyed when somebody called me a marshmallow, but, that day I was particularly pissed, because I had just had a baby. I was feeling good. I had lost the baby weight. I was fitting in my skinny jeans, right? And isn't that how so many of us determine our fitness? When we can shimmy into that and suck it in and zip it up and go, right? But, in her defense, I was kind of a marshmallow. Even worse than that, I was a marshmallow that had been put in the freezer because I could not squish and bend into any of these ballet positions that all these other dancers could do, So there I am, and I'm feeling now very intimidated. But I had a character to write, so I said, okay, all right, you can make me a rock. Let's rock, let's do this. So I took ballet classes twice a week for an entire year to be able to write this story. So much so that she put me in the recital. Oh. Yeah. So the funny thing about that, she put me, the adults were supposed to do this dance after all the kids, and she puts me way in the back, besides another ballerina who I'm pretty sure was pregnant. That's, and, but, I went through it, and I did have a video that I considered showing, but you can't really hear the music over the sound of my husband's laughter, so I just figured I'd show that. But yeah, I never, suffice it to say, I never became a rock. No, I was never hard like that. I was more like a sand dune, semi-hard and easily eroded. But, I actually go to a running studio in Tenafly, JumaFit, to keep my physique now. And I like it so much better than ballet because for a person who's anxious and thinks about horrible things and why they happen all day, it's teaching me a life skill, you know, like how to run away fast. And that's an important thing. What I liked most about the ballet, though, was talking to other ballerinas and really asking them about, you know, what it was like kind of being involved in such a competitive and athletic sport from so early on, and how it impacted, you know, their outlook and the way they do everything from get up in the morning and eat breakfast and think about the rest of the day and all of their friendships. And later on, I was interviewed by a woman that had danced in the Royal Ballet for an article, and she said I got the ballet right. So at least I did the research part, which is so important, right? Because fiction, it is fiction, but it has to feel real. And for that to happen, you have to do the research. You can't write a story about, you know, ballet without having taken some dance classes, or at least talk to someone who's taken dance classes. You can't write a story about financial fraud without having done some research about financial fraud. Of course, you know, these are professions that exist, and these are, you're writing about places often that exist. Of course, unless you are super, super famous, it's really hard to always get first-person sources. And I say that, of course, from experience. I know that a lot of you probably had no idea who was talking to you today, and that's totally cool. I get it. I am not Stephen King or Gillian Flynn, but, you know, I have hopes. One day, I believe that Ben Affleck might bring his boyish good looks and cleft chin to play the schmuck in the screen adaptation of one of my novels. You know, I am putting the intention out there, speaking it into the universe. But because the universe takes time to materialize intentions, I do have other ways of getting kind of intimate accounts of places. One of them is I love interior designer websites. Any interior designers? I see one. Shelly Checker Gay there. I totally stole this off her site. That's why I have to shout her out. So I love looking at pictures like this, and I think, oh gosh, look at that gorgeous room. I wonder the kind of people that inhabit a place like that, and then what they do to each other, you know? I also love realtors for the same reason. Any realtors in the audience? I think I see Stacy Esser. She sold me my house, which I love. Funny story about my house. So I spent a lot of time when I should have been writing, kind of thinking about, you know, the decorating and the paint schemes and whatever. And I spent so much time, it was taking up so much of my brain, that I ended up setting an entire story in my house and killing a character on my dining room table. Yeah, the table totally deserved it, though. You know, I mean, I love this table, but it had this totally porous top that just every bit of liquid just sucked down into the crevices and formed an indelible stain that like no amount of baking soda would ever, you know, surface. And so every time I would look at this table, I would fear that red wine, which I also love, you know, would fall on this table and just become this spot, you know, Lady Macbeth's bloodstain. So, you know, I decided to have a character get shot in the dining room and bleed out on the table. And now, like, every time I look at it, it doesn't really remind me of red wine anymore. So that's you know, that was a positive. But going back to why I love realtors, you guys do these great videos and their walkthroughs of these beautiful homes, and you enter the foyer and you see the, you know, the living room and the dining room and the view from the kitchen window, and I can just set an entire story in a house that I've never stepped foot inside. It really is a service to the writing community. We thank you. Yeah, it's great. You know, I do, as a rule, I don't set stories in Zillow houses in the neighborhood, so don't worry. I think that would be awkward. You know, you meet a new person, they go, oh, you know, she just moved into the new house on Highwood. And you go, oh yeah, I know that house well, actually. You know, however, if you did have a house in the Hamptons, there's a chance that I stole a room or two for this book. Oh, nope, not that yet. I stole a room or two because, you know, I was looking on Zillow for that. I think most of the house that I used, though, belong to these two. Yeah, Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin. It was a gorgeous house. I got it in their divorce, you know. So that's great. But I don't think that whoever owns it now would necessarily recognize the house. You know, I changed up enough of the rooms and everything. You know, that same story is set in there it is, One Little Secret. That same story is set in the Hamptons, and it deals with issues of sexual assault and domestic abuse and consent. And I knew I wanted a female detective to be the one uncovering these crimes. I'm not a female detective, so I had to go find one. So I went and looked through all of these different police departments, and I found actually one police department that had 2 female detectives, Bloomfield. And so they were kind enough to let me kind of go around and go through their jails and everything, and then talk to a female detective, Shona Maldonado. And she told me these stories about, you know, the cases that she has, and what really came out to me was just how difficult it was when you're dealing with cases where it really comes down to he said, she said, you know, and you have to figure out, well, who is telling the truth, and handicap it that way. And so I didn't use any of the specifics of any of her cases, but I did take the burden she carried, and she told me one story that really stuck with me. You know, it was about a 12-year-old boy who was in foster care, and he accused his foster father of molesting him. And so, you know, she's there, and she's a mom, she has kids, and she's interviewing him, and he's stoically saying, you know, these are the things that happen. And by the time she's done, she comes out and she says she's just in tears, and she talks to her captain and says, we gotta get, you know, the other foster kids out of this home and the guy's biological kids out of the home. And the captain says, you know, I'm not sure he's telling the truth. And she's kind of shocked by this, right? Because she's just been in this room talking to this kid. And he says, well, we have to investigate it. So while they are investigating it, all the children are removed from the house. And in the course of the investigation, she realizes that it didn't happen, that the father was actually out of the state on all of these dates where the abuse allegedly took place. And so they tell the boy this, and he says, well, you know, I'm sorry, but I thought that if my foster parents were ruled unfit, that I'd be sent back to my biological parents. And so, you know, what I took from that really, in addition to just how hard it is to be a detective, was that every kind of bad guy has a justification in their own mind of why what they do is warranted. And I try and bring that to my stories. I try and kind of show both sides of the story. But I also, you know, do come down with some sort of moral. I think that all writers have to have a point of view to be good. You just can't beat the reader over the head with it, you know, because people read to be entertained. And they read for that catharsis, that feeling of, you know, at the end that justice was done, that the things are set right with the world. And that people can move on and be better. You know, that's kind of the feeling that I try to leave at the end of my novels, but it really is the feeling that so many of the doctors and everyone at Englewood Hospital creates for real. You know, they're actually comforting the sick, making people feel better, and healing the soul. You know, as have all of you who are supporting the organization today. So I thank you guys all so much for all that you do and for having me. And I am happy to answer any questions.